Happy to see your faces. We're going to try recording this. So know that we don't know how many people access our YouTube channel, but you may want to not say indicting things if you're concerned at all about internet access to our proceedings. I chose this topic for today as a respite. So Linda, you're in the right place. For post Holy Week, post Easter extravaganzas, for people who just want a little bit of peace and quiet. I'm hoping this will be helpful. This seeing with new eyes perspective. I'm liberally borrowing from Drew Benson, who is on the staff at LeaderWise, and shared a really great little video that I want to share with you by Rachel Naomi Remen. You may know her from her, she has many books out, but her most famous one is called My Grandfather's Blessings. She's a physician and has a Jewish background, but has a really beautiful approach to medicine and to healing that parallels so beautifully with the spiritual life. And she's offering an opportunity to think about one's day in a way that is both classical and ancient, and you'll see why I say that, and also very contemporary. It invites us to reflect upon the day, to take stock, if you will, of the day that has just passed, as an opportunity to see afresh the work of God, the hand of God in our daily lives, something that's so easy to overlook. I don't know about you, but it's very easy for me to be thinking about the day's tasks as tasks, and to forget that that God is in the details, and that God is in the interruptions, and that life has much broader, deeper meaning than accomplishing tasks and crossing them off one's to-do list. So there, I've outed myself as someone who's task-oriented, but I think I might be in some fairly decent company on that, because I think it's not uncommon. Heather, you're smiling as you adjust your screen. I'm really glad to see you as well today, and I hope we'll have others who join us, because this really is, the prelude and the call to worship, right? In terms of a Sunday morning time. And I don't know about you, but people always show up after the call to worship, don't they? So let's begin with a word of prayer, shall we? Gracious God, we give you thanks for the beauty of this day and the beauty of this week, the quiet, beautiful opportunity to dust off our alleluias, to revel in the marvel of new life and new beginnings and surprises and opportunities to recalibrate and retool ourselves, because our faith has reminded us that God makes all things surprisingly new. We need that breath of fresh air. We need that hope. We need that reminder of your accompaniment and your hand upon us. We're glad to be together today, and pray that the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts will be not only acceptable in your sight, but life-giving for each person on this call. We pray this in the name of our risen Lord. Amen. So there's Jose Soto, just like that. You pray and he appears. So glad you're here, Jose. Great to see you. Boom, like that. So I want to show you the video that Drew Benson from LeaderWise suggests is a great way to be thinking about a practice. Remen calls it a 3-question journal practice. And Drew Benson says he came across this resource several years ago when he was a busy graduate student and found himself in the space between vitality and exhaustion. I love that combination, that there are things that are life-giving in our lives and they are simultaneously tiring. And so he said he attended a webinar put on by Rachel Naomi Remen and Commonweal, where she introduced this daily 3-question journal practice that he has found to be helpful. She explains the practice in the video below and also gives a description in a PDF that I will put in the chat, a link to it so that you can access it if you want to refer to this at some other time. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to see if I can do this in a fairly elegant way. I'm going to share this with you. And now I'm going to see if I can, let's see, now I'm screen sharing. Now I'm going to press play and I'm going to hope that you can see this. How am I doing? So far, so good. Can you see the video? Great. Here goes.
Angela's Arian, the anniversary of her death is coming up. So let's start with one of the things that she taught me that is very, very helpful in this. And that's getting people to keep a 3-question journal. Now, this is a riff on her work. And it's a very powerful riff because it connects people to the life around them, to the meaning in the life around them. Well, let me tell you about it, and then you tell me what you think. It's very simple. You take a journal that you have only for this purpose. And I'm not a journal writer. Even I can do this thing, right? You got about 10 minutes a night to do it. And you generally do it after supper in the early evening, sort of towards the end of the day. You find a quiet place, a place where you can have 10 minutes by yourself without being interrupted by a person or a phone call or, a text or anything like this. And you sit quietly and you're going to review your day backwards 3 times. Right? Almost like a video. If you're a visual person, it may be easier for you. I'm not a visual person and I can do this. Where you say to yourself, okay, where was I just before I sat down here? I was at dinner. And you just allow yourself to remember that. And then before that, I was driving here. And before that, I was in a meeting. And before that, maybe I was in my garden. And before that, and you just run your day backwards, like a videotape, but backwards, right? And you're heading towards the morning. You're heading towards the time that you got out of bed, right? And the first time you do this, you ask yourself a question, this question: what surprised me today? What surprised me today? As soon as you find anything that surprised you, not the most surprising thing, that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for strengthening your capacity to be surprised, noticing probably something you did not notice when you lived through it, going forward, but going backwards, you notice it. I was surprised by the kindness that the checker showed to the person in front of me in the supermarket just before I came home. And you write that down, right? And then you go to the place where you're sitting again, and you start all over again. And you ask yourself the second question, what touched my heart today? What touched my heart today? And you begin to go backwards again towards the morning, looking for the first thing you come to that touched your heart. And as soon as you find something that touched your heart, you write it down. And you don't have to write a whole lot. You can write as much as you want, but you don't have to. You can just want to write down what touched your heart. You could do it in 2 sentences if you want. And then you do it for the last time. You go back to where you're sitting, take a moment, and start the review back, the daily review backwards again. And you ask yourself the third question: what inspired me today? And the first person that I ever told this to and got to do this, right, was a guy who came to one of our doctor meetings. His wife made him come because he was a surgeon. He was so profoundly depressed by his life. He was a cancer surgeon, actually, that he was going to drop out. He couldn't do this anymore. He could barely get out of bed and go and see those people, I mean, he just couldn't do it anymore. Right? And she said, you can retire, but before you do this, you have to come to Commonweal and do this thing. Right? So he came, and he was, really, really depressed and very walled off. And Angela's had just been talking to me about the journal, so I figured out I'd try it with him. So I suggested it to him. And he says, well, I don't know. I don't think so. And I said, it's cheaper than Prozac. And I sort of shamed him into it. Right? And 3 days after the end of the workshop, he calls me up and he says, okay, Rachel, what's the trick to this? And I said, what kind of trick? What are you talking about? He says, I've been doing this for 3 days and I get the same answer to every question. Nothing, nothing, and nothing. I don't understand how I'm so busy and nothing is happening to me. And I said, are you looking as if you're a doctor? He says, of course I am. I'm a surgeon. I said, no, look as if you're a storyteller or a poet or you make movies. Right? Look for the stories. And there was this silence. And he says to me, I'll try, Rachel, which is not a good sign. And I expected to hear from him. And I didn't. And I figured, well, nice try, Rachel, And then there was another workshop, maybe about 9 months later, and he came to it. I saw his name on the list. And then he told us what happened. He said, at first, it was nothing, nothing, and nothing. He had forgotten how to see. There's an old saying, the voyage of discovery lies not in seeking new vistas, but in having new eyes. And this discovery model, it doesn't just happen in the meeting. You begin to take it out into the world. And that's what this little exercise does, right? Okay, it was nothing, nothing. And then he began to see things. Someone's tumor was an 1/18 of an inch smaller. Even though the chemo wasn't supposed to work for this tumor, it was obviously working. And he was surprised by that. I mean, that was the kind of thing, right? And then he began to see lots of other things that he did not see living forward through his day. He could only see them 7 hours after they happened in his bedroom. And he was astounded. he was astounded. There was this lag time. He says he felt like he had been under a spell, like in a fairy tale, and he could only see life 7 hours after it happened to him. And he couldn't see it when it was actually happening to him. He said, and then the miracle happened. I said, what was the miracle? He said, the gap shortened. And I began to be surprised, and my heart was touched, and I was inspired in the moment my life was happening to me. And then everything changed. Right. So you invite people to fully inhabit their lives. You don't tell them that necessarily. You wait until they tell you. But this little exercise strengthens the will to live in people. His depression, which is, I think, an attack on the will to live, gone. This is a way to strengthen the will to live, the hidden will to live in people. Surprise. How enlivening is this? Your heart is touched, you're connected, you're inspired by something larger in people than themselves. Okay? This is a very helpful thing to do when people are struggling with a disease.
Okay, I apologize. It sounds like you could hear it but couldn't see Rachel, and I think that's operator error. I think what I did was I shared the site, but I hit the
When you
audio.
become ill,
Whoops, hold on. More Rachel. So let me put in the chat the link to the video if you would like to see Rachel talking, Dr. Remen talking to you, rather than just listening to her. But, you know, pretend it was a podcast. A good thing to listen to. Rachel Remen referenced two things, at least, that warrant some explanation. Commonweal, which is the conference center and not-for-profit that Dr. Remen operates, is found at commonweal, WEAL.org. And it's a really interesting organization that merges healing, medicine, and the arts. And she's the founder. The other person that she referenced was Angeles Arian, who is the inspiration for this 3-question journal thing. She's an author. She's written many books. The Fourfold Way is the book that she has written. And interestingly, she's a cultural anthropologist. And so if you're listening to all of this and thinking about reflecting on your day, whether it's as an instrument for healing, as Dr. Remen suggests, or it's a spiritual practice to kind of see the fingerprints of God in our lives, if you're at all aware of classical spirituality and Roman Catholicism in particular, you know the Ignatian practice of the daily examen. I wish David Crowley's camera was on, because I think he'd be nodding. I think he knows all about the Ignatian journey and all of that. And so this is really a riff on that as well. It's really a beautiful thing, if you think about it, to pause and reflect upon one's day. What I found to be especially powerful about the audio that you and I listened to just now was the little story about the surgeon who was going through his day, but not reflectively. And what a powerful example of the power of a practice, you know, that he agreed to do this very reluctantly, right? And didn't see any results, but over time, called it miraculous, that the gap between reflecting on his day 7 hours later, and the events of his day, was that gap was shortening. I don't know if you have any experience with this kind of a practice, the notion of kind of pausing and taking stock of your day. It's not that different from Oprah's 5 Things You're Grateful For, the guru of spirituality in the last century, and maybe this one too. I want to put up the PDF that I told you is available, all about this, with the instructions about this practice. I'm learning to talk and share at the same time. There's that. And you can click right on these and they'll take you right there. So you can head to the 3-question journal practice, which includes all kinds of things, like the quote that Dr. Remen shared: "The voyage of discovery lies in not seeking new vistas, but in having new eyes." It's a beautiful quote. And the adaptation by Angeles Arian, and then the 3 questions: what surprised me today, what touched my heart today, and what inspired me today. The idea of taking up one's journal and reflecting upon those things, I think is quite profound. Ignatian questions for the daily examine are different, and we can share those if you're interested, if that's not, plowing over ground that's already familiar. But I think I wonder what your reaction to this is. Questions like what surprised me, what touched my heart, what inspired me today. That's what you do when you're brushing your teeth at night or saying your prayers? Do you have different questions that you ask yourself at the end of the day, or are your questions not questions but statements? What works for you as you reflect upon your day? Because that's what this is. It's a day end reflection. And what she says is important is the backward look, the reflecting upon what has happened, to savor that, if you will. So what works for you? Thinking back, what has worked? Jose.
For me, this video reminded me of what we're doing right now with the CRE program. I believe her name is Gwen Morgan, right?
Gwen Wills. Gwen
Wills.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and as a future CRE, this is helpful for seeking inspiration, for sermon writing. And so this is what spoke to my heart, at least this morning, in terms of if someday if I have to preach, then I would use these prompts to sort of find inspiration, that, and also for my personal life too, as I would invite myself to be more contemplative in that way.
Nice. How I'm looking at our screen, and we've got pastors and preachers and directors of faith formation and Stephen ministers and chaplains on this call. How could something like this be useful in your ministry to and with others?
I think so. I work with youth and some young adults mostly. I just think it's a different way to look at what everything is going on. Especially with teenagers, if you ask them, like, how are things going? You either get a non-word sound, meh, whatever, or you get it's fine, and they don't go into it. But I think these questions kind of lead them into thinking along different lines. and maybe something specific or an emotional state. Our youth group has been talking a lot about mental health this year, something they really wanted to dive into. And I think this would pair perfectly with that too, because it doesn't necessarily have to be an event or a thing that occurred during their day. It could be a state of being or a state of mind as well. So I think these are really good reflection questions for the next time I meet with my youth and young adults.
Yeah, oh, great. What a great use for that. I'm thinking too that when people are immersed in their thoughts and feelings in a way that is challenging or draining rather than inspiring and life-giving, I believe that's where Dr. Remen started with this, that this was an opportunity with the surgeon to address some of his depression too. I know that when life gets heavy, the things that stand out are the burdensome things. You know, how was your day? Today was hard. And here are the 17 ways that today was hard. And as my grandmother used to say, they rent a lot of space in one's head. But if we can create some different neural pathways, if what we're focusing on and looking for is the surprise, the heart touching, the inspiration, I think that's pretty powerful with youth and young adults too. I think it's pretty powerful in light of gun violence. You know, there is so much about our current culture that makes us lament and mourn and feel helpless and feel unable to address something so big and so overwhelming. And this is not to say that we should ignore any of that, but maybe if we can find ways to move out of what is so burdensome and you know, maybe it will move us to action instead of lament. I think it's important to lament, don't get me wrong, but I think that when we get stuck in lament and say, what can we do? You know, what can be done? But I wonder, you know, maybe what inspires us one of these days are the people who point us to actions that we can take. David Crowley, you have unmuted yourself. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, I'll try not to make this a sermonette. I think that tracing the examine not only daily, but for longer periods of time is valuable. And it's an especially valuable technique when we're moving through different phases of our lives. I obviously, I work at Peabody Retirement Community, so I deal with people, well, the few people left on earth who are older than me. And one of the issues, well, actually, she brings up a couple of the fundamental issues at Peabody. A lot of older people are mired in depression or anomie or acedia because they've identified with their work, and that's gone.
Right.
And what purpose does it have? We say that wisdom is the great virtue when we're older, but we don't have any places in our society to allow that to be shared or spread. But some people feel drawn to doing a memoir of sorts and making that a present to their children. And these three questions are great prompts for people writing their memoir. And what is a memoir then? Replaying your life backward.
Right.
Instead of I was born, but how, you know, because it really a memoir is looking at how did I get here at this point in my life. And then I'm attracted to your idea that this sort of activity is part of cognitive behavioral therapy,
Yeah.
because it indeed allows us to maybe cut some different pathways in our minds. And finally, what a perfect thing this is for Easter, to look at. I just did a program, 2 days ago, looking at life through Easter eyes, that very much talks about looking at the world with in the context of new life. The end.
Well, that was a beautiful little sermonette and very helpful. I love the idea of these questions being having greater length, not just what surprised me about today, what touched my heart today, but what inspired, touched, and surprised us throughout the course of our lives. That's a fabulous way to adapt this. The daily examine, the Ignatian, the classic one, is really all about reviewing the day. The 5 steps of that prayer for Ignatius was being aware of God's presence, reviewing the day with gratitude, paying attention to one's emotions, choosing a feature of the day and praying from it, and looking toward tomorrow, which is kind of lovely. There's a scholar from Creighton University, a Jesuit named Dennis Ham, who wrote a great article, and I'll also throw it in the chat as well. Watch me do this all at once. Called "Rummaging for God," praying backward through your day. And I just want to read you one quote as a commercial for why it would be good to take time to enjoy this article. Here it is. He proposes a way of doing examine that works for him, and I'll share his 5 steps in just a minute. But here's what he says. This is fun. There's a very fun little story at the beginning that I commend to you, which is funny if you're at all interested in liturgy. And then he says this, the biblical phrase, "If today you hear God's voice," implies that the divine voice must somehow be accessible in our daily experience. For we're creatures who live one day at a time. If God wants to communicate with us, it has to happen in the course of a 24-hour day, for we live in no other time. So how do we go about this kind of listening? Long tradition has provided a helpful tool, which we call the examination of consciousness today, or the examine. Rummaging for God is an expression that suggests going through a drawer full of stuff, feeling around, looking for something that you're sure must be in there somewhere. I think that image catches some of the feel of what is classically known in church language as the prayer of examine. Isn't that a great object, the rummaging around in a drawer for something you know is there, rummaging through your day, reflecting on it to see, what we can identify as the hand of God. And so Dennis Ham talks about a different 5 steps. And it's in the article. He talks about praying for light. He talks about reviewing the day in thanksgiving. He talks about reviewing the feelings that surface in the replay of the day. Great thing to journal about. He talks about, as the 4th way of approaching this, choosing one of those feelings, positive or negative, and praying from it, and then looking toward tomorrow. It's a very different way of thinking about it. And he talks about, a mnemonic device for recalling those points as LT3F: light, thanksgiving, feelings, focus, future. So that's in there. That's the 3rd piece that I put in the chat for you. This is just like a million rabbit holes of fun resources for praying and thinking about reflection upon one's day. It's certainly, it's one more thing, right? In our busy lives and that those to-do lists we referenced at the beginning. But I don't know about you, I have found it helpful to have this kind of a spiritual practice. It has changed me over the years to pause and reflect and operate under the assumption that the pause is worth it, than to just say, well, that's another day and rip it off the one day at a time calendar. But it also invites us to think outside about what happened, to think reflectively and a bit removed from what we're doing, because in the moment, it's sometimes hard to be attentive and mindful as much as we would wish. I think it might be a really helpful thing for younger people, for adolescents and young adults, to be thinking about that one step removed as we, head up onto the balcony to think about the day that has just gone on. What thoughts does this prompt for you? You're welcome to vehemently disagree with any and all of this.
Hi, I'm sorry, please.
Linda, you're up.
Okay. I like these questions. Like Heather, I think they'll be excellent for opening conversations and Stephen ministry conversations, which can sort of wander around for 15 or 20 minutes without getting to the heart of the issues. And this is a gentle way to invite that kind of reflection. So I think that's excellent. I'm also going to try it because I am sick and tired of ruminating over my bad days in the middle of the night. And right now I'm in the middle of a bunch of stuff again. And so I need a different way to live and process that stuff. And this sounds, I've never tried to think backwards. I've never, the questions are sort of general and good, but the thinking backwards,
yes,
sounds powerful and new. So I'm going to try that. We'll see how this works.
Okay, I'll be interested in hearing.
You're probably going to be hearing from me anyway. So okay.
I think I probably will, but that's okay. That's good too. David, you were going to say something.
I don't know if Jose is still here, but I wanted to applaud his idea of using this for sermon prep, but also I would just extend it to Bible reading as a spiritual practice in general, and then Bible reading as a spiritual practice for preaching. In the dark ages, when I went to seminary, literary approaches to scripture were just starting to percolate, and the historical critical method was regnant. And you can do what you're told and spend 20 to 25 hours on historical critical research of your passage and be in exactly the same place as you were before that for your sermon. This, I think, can really open some doors to when you're reading the passage that will, what am I trying to say, open up some new avenues for dealing with the passage.
It occurs to me, David, that they're different Lectio Divina questions, right? What surprised me, what touched my heart, what inspired me about this passage is another way of doing exactly what you're suggesting. And it could be very powerful. Remember, Dr. Remen talked to the surgeon when he said, nothing, nothing, nothing. I got nothing, this is no good. And she said, look for the stories, right? And isn't that what, the the parts, the traditional Lectio questions, what stands out to you, what sparkles, what are the stories from your day that cause you to give thanks and see God's hand and be inspired. Good stuff. Good stuff. More thoughts? Closing thoughts? Sending thoughts?
I've got about a million different thoughts, but I've got one question. I'm wondering, Jennifer, in your experience doing this, is there a cumulative benefit to it? And by that, I mean, do you ever page back through and look at previous days' answers to questions, or is this you do it, tear it off and throw it into the fire and do it afresh each day, or is there any benefit to keeping a journal that you can page through and look at?
I think it's the latter, Kevin. I think it is appropriate to keep a journal that you look back upon as well. I've not done this particular practice this particular way with journaling. I think that's part of the point, though, to journal, to be able to look back. I don't think these are Julia Cameron's Artist Way morning praises pages where it's just, in Anne Lamott's words, is the shitty first draft. There's just you just put it out there and deposit it like a Harry Potter pensive. I don't think that's it. I think it is meant for you to think about not only the day, but the weeks and the years and the trends and where you've come from nothing to, I notice things differently. I notice things more. I'd say yes, to, and one of the reasons why I say yes is that the handout, which I think is the second link that I sent you, says, Dr. Remen says, I recommend a bound journal, a bound book journal. And I think that sounds more permanent than temporary, but that's just a guess. But I'd say yeah. And I know that I personally wax and wane on things. It may be some undiagnosed, ADD in my life. I don't know, that the shininess rubs off after a while on some practice. And I think, oh, now this feels like a have to and not a want to anymore. And so, I don't have very many lifelong practices, but I do know that when I've journaled in some form or fashion, that it has been very meaningful and very positive, whether it's journaling for stories that'll be sermon illustrations, Jose. You need to know that I was raised back in the day that you didn't use any personal illustrations in sermons, and you never used first person pronouns, and you certainly didn't use your family members as illustrations. And imagine the thousands of years of boring sermons that are all about somebody else's ruminations. But I've recovered some from that, but not terribly much. I also was from the horrible era, that says never let them see you emote in worship either. But now I just wear waterproof mascara. So.
Well, I really like this a lot, and you just went to preaching right to me, because I've been journeying through my own discovery of, oh yeah, I really have been living with ADHD my whole life and didn't know it until Quincy Worthington started to post these ADHD memes on Facebook, and I'm like, yeah, that sort of fits. and then went down that rabbit trail, which is a very ADHD thing to do. So so I appreciate that component of it too, and I've already had the discussion in my head of, wow, this would be a really good practice to adopt. I could never do this on a daily basis.
But you could do it some, I bet. And I think something's better than nothing. And I think even, sentences. I used to use the word bullet points. I try not to say bullet points anymore. But I think there's value. I think the amount that one writes is less important than the reflection on the questions.
Well, we had a briefly lived practice as a family, that when we would gather at table, we would ask everybody around the table to share what was the best part of your day and what was the worst part of your day.
Highs and lows. Yeah.
And the intent behind that was to get people sharing in a different way, but also to build resiliency, to make it normative that every day has a high and every day has a low. But at first glance, I like this better because it doesn't put a value judgment on the questions. I'm not judging bad or good. It's what surprised me. And sometimes surprises are good, and sometimes surprises aren't good. And sometimes we don't know until 7 hours, 7 days, 7 years later, whether it was a good surprise or a not good surprise. So I really like that idea of what surprised me, what touched my heart, what inspired me, because there's not a value judgment on that. Yeah,
I agree. I think it's powerful. We do that here in our little community, generational fun place, and we started doing highs and lows. And Eleanor, our 4-year-old granddaughter, watch me break this rule about telling stories about my family. Watch me do it. Eleanor has switched up the questions, and she will say things like, tell somebody your favorite food. Tell everybody your favorite food. And she's gone through a cycle of favorites, but now she's gone through things like what scares you the most and all sorts of things. She's just mining her family, and also making space for her to say, I want to tell you what scared me today. Or, because it's always really not just favorites, but what's on her mind in the moment. And I love that. I love making space in our own lives as individuals and in our relationships with others for reflection, for that kind of meaningful reflection and that storytelling. I want to tell you too about one more thing before we head off, because it's just about time. My friend Jeff Lane, who's a Presbyterian pastor, used to be in Fort Wayne, and now he's a pastor in Wilmette, Illinois, Presbyterian, has a daily podcast called The Daily Edify. And it's on all sorts of platforms. I got it off of, Apple Podcasts. It's a daily thing. It's about 5 minutes long. He's got the sweetest voice ever. It's just easy to listen to. He's very, very transparent about a journey through and with depression that has changed him for the better. He has always been a thoughtful guy, but now he's very, very passionate about spiritual practices as a way to bring healing to individuals and to the world. I highly recommend it as a delightful part of one's day. And I admit that I don't go to a quiet place to listen to it. I'm in my car when I listen to the Daily Edify, but I'm always glad I listened to it. And then I have 4 other podcasts that I listen to religiously, but that's for another day. But if you're podcast people, there you go, The Daily Edify. And it's Jeff Lane, and his last name is spelled Lehn. We've had his wife, Adrienne Lane, Braithwaite Lane, come to do a thing on Lent with us and lament during the pandemic, if the name Lane rings a bell. I want to close with a Mary Oliver poem, because what day is not better for having Mary Oliver in it? So hang on a second and let me get to it, because it requires a couple of clicks. And I personally think that we could spend a lot of time with Mary Oliver, and that would be a spiritual practice as well. Do you know the poem In Blackwater Woods? Are you familiar with that one? You may when you hear it, but let's let this be our closing prayer together today. Here we go. Look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light, are giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. The long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of the ponds, and every pond, no matter what its name is nameless now. Every year, everything I have ever learned in my lifetime leads me back to this: the fires and the black river of loss, whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do 3 things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. Amen. Loved being with you. Come see us next week when we're doing something else that's fun that I can't remember off the top of my head, but if I look at it, we're going to talk about the GA amendments that we haven't voted on yet. How's that for an alternative to journaling for inspiration? There you go. Can't wait to see you again, especially in person. Take good care,
So
everybody.
much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.